Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Red Turtle. Despite this film being directed by a Dutch filmmaker, co-produced by a Japanese animation studio, and a French animation studio that's actually located in Berlin, which is super confusing, this film isn't really a foreign language film. It's not really a language of any film, because there's not really any dialogue. Now, I wouldn't really classify this as a silent film, but I think that's one thing that I think animation can still do that live action really can't, is make a film without dialogue, but do it in kind of this natural way where you don't feel like they don't need to do the pantomime they used to have to do in the silent era. You can have amazing, gorgeous landscapes, you can have various illustrative reasons why the characters don't talk, and it kind of works a lot more naturally. We saw this last year with Shaun the Sheep movie, but The Red Turtle's doing it in a whole different kind of, it's not like the same kind of movie as Shaun the Sheep, it's just the same kind of way it tells its story as Shaun the Sheep. And I really kind of like that about The Red Turtle. It makes it far more contemplative. It puts you in a story and just kind of lets you take it in. It's almost like you're just kind of having a visual feast in the theater of some really great European animation, and it works in that kind of adventure Hergé way, especially in design and story wise, but it's still telling itself in this kind of contemplative way, which I think is an interesting way to take it. And there's not many art forms that can tell a story only with visuals, obviously like paintings and photography, but also I think The Red Turtle is far more influenced by kind of comics. Now, certainly I've already brought up Hergé and that kind of thing, which is very much an influence on it, but it almost feels like the way it's telling its story is more of an illustrative kind of comic book background as well as animation, which I think is really interesting. It kind of works in a way that you almost feel like you're living out someone's life stuck on this island. You're kind of understanding what that life would be like, not in kind of a metaphorical way, but almost in a real life sort of way. It plays out both like a fable and a mystical kind of a thing, but also kind of like you're experiencing what life, you feel like you feel the flow of life that would be of this man and the woman he falls in love with and his child and everything. And this is this director's directorial debut, and it's kind of like an interesting opus of a deconstruction of a survival movie that just tells you the big broad strokes of someone's life, and that might be the various outline of it, but how he tells it in this kind of bare bones contemplative sense to it without any dialogue brings you in and lets the whole kind of beautiful, colorful experience wash over you in a way that I don't see a lot of animated films really doing, or films in general able to do it in the way that this film really does. A man who, at the beginning of this film, we see him just floating in the water. He's clearly lost at sea. We don't see him or how he got lost at sea before we see him on screen, but then we see him find this island and live on there, and as he's stuck on this island, he makes various rafts and tries to leave the island only to have the rafts destroyed by something he's not exactly sure bump these rafts underneath the water. And then one time he sees a giant red turtle who's actually been doing this, and then the red turtle eventually comes up onto the island, then kills the red turtle by knocking the red turtle over on its shell, and the red turtle dies and then is reborn as a beautiful red-haired woman, and the man and the woman fall in love and live off their life together on this amazing, beautiful island where they live out their days and eventually have a son. So one of the bigger reasons this movie's come on most people's radar is because it's co-produced by Studio Ghibli and has sort of involvement from Isao Takahata, who's one of its founders. And I don't really know how much involvement Studio Ghibli really had in this film. I know they pursued this director to make a feature film, and Hayao Miyazaki, in fact, pursued this director with Takahata, although it sounds like Takahata was far more involved in the making of this film, because Miyazaki's name is not on this film at all, despite the fact that his name gets brought up in like most of the reviews for The Red Turtle and press for it, which I think is a little odd. It feels and flows more like a Takahata film. Design-wise, it's not. Takahata's a lot more experimental. This film plays within its rules. I think it was Takahata and maybe 5 other, and they're counting Takahata as 6, I'm not exactly sure. Animators from Studio Ghibli helped on this film. Supposedly they really helped more with the design. The nature feels very Studio Ghibli, but the other design does not at all. And the credit in the film was that Isao Takahata was the artistic producer, which I don't know what that means. I've never heard of an artistic producer as a credit. I mean, I've heard of executive and associate producers, so I don't exactly know what he did other than the design was interesting. The Studio Ghibli logo that opened before this film was red instead of blue. I'm not sure what that means. Takahata is a great mentor, and he was a mentor actually to Hayao Miyazaki himself and many great Japanese animators. So it's interesting to see him go and do that with someone like a Dutch filmmaker who's working for a French animated studio and kind of branching out from that. Studio Ghibli always was more interested in European animation, so in a way it sort of makes a lot of sense. But I think this director, whose shorts I've seen a while ago, kind of shows a real sense of being able to do fairy tale and fables and mix them together with a real kind of simpler broad strokes of a story of someone's life. And I like how he really does that throughout this film, especially with the turtle character who eventually becomes this beautiful woman, and the character of the man, I guess, and even the son later on in the film, and how he's able to tell this story that it is kind of a stranger story and it is a little odd, but it plays in such an ordinary kind of slice of life way, which you can kind of feel the Takahata influence in that. But the way he's taken this story that is stranger and odder and kind of this mystical fairy tale thing that could, bring up issues of God or someone looking out for you, and play it more like just kind of a slice of life thing, says a lot about him as a director, because this could have taken on a whole different meanings, and you can even read into a lot of stuff with it, especially the fact that he basically kind of starts a sexual relationship with, a turtle. I did think it later, it was like, is this like he made up this whole thing because he was like fucking this turtle or something? That did cross my mind, and I don't think that's entirely a totally perverted interpretation of the movie. I don't think it's the correct one though. It does kind of have this really wonderful feeling about life with it. I think The Red Turtle's probably one of the few animated films that kind of leaves you with your thoughts, lets you experience it, and lets you take away from it what you are going to take away from it, but it's not a narrative that's there to overstimulate you or comfort you or give you all the answers within it. And in fact, I think it kind of shows you all the answers on screen in a way that doesn't leave you with any. The way he tells the story, it's kind of almost the similar thing I had with April in the Extraordinary World. A lot of French animation, European animation has this kind of basic like adventure storiness to it that they seem to like adhering in that genre, and it feels very kind of, I guess the way it tells the story is very structured. And The Red Turtle, despite this story being very unique, I mean, I've never heard of a story where a turtle becomes a woman and a guy being stuck on a desert island or anything, but it feels very structured, almost like it feels like a genre piece within that, and not one that's bursting out the seams with creativity in terms of its structure. How he tells that story, I think, is incredibly creative and welcomes you in and makes you think about what's going on and think about your own life. I was kind of surprised how much like introspection this kind of film brought on while I was viewing it, but I didn't feel incredibly shocked by it. I didn't feel like afterwards kind of pulsating with it. I think it's kind of one of those animated films that you experience. I definitely see another film from this director, Michael DeWitt, I believe, and I think he's incredibly talented. He really knows how to present a story. I think that's probably the best thing. It's like how he did it, and that kind of shows how great of a filmmaker he is. But I can almost see why people would go, okay, well that was a thing that I saw, but what is this giving me other than these just rich, amazing visual stories? And what is it really saying with that visual story? Does it really make you feel like you're really interpreting or saying these big things about life, or is it doing it in a broad stroke way, and because of its contemplative tilt to it, that it's kind of acting like these broad strokes are more meaningful than maybe they necessarily are? I think this is a kind of film that will probably feel richer on other viewings and such, so maybe those meanings will come more clear to me if I ever do get to see it again. But I think what he does with this kind of illustrative visual storytelling is he removes the specificity of storytelling that I think works so much better in certainly like dialogue type films, but without having that, he makes it almost like too broad in a way that you can kind of connect to these people. But I was connecting them on more like, oh, okay, this guy, he likes this girl, he has this kid, and things like that. But it wasn't any more specific. Mainly when you get more and more specific, you can actually end up being more universal, and almost this felt like it was trying to be more universal, but it ended up not being that because you know so little about these characters, and I don't think it worked as well probably because of that, but it's such an amazing visual feast, and what it does with the animation medium, I can absolutely see why Studio Ghibli would be interested in someone like this, and why they'd want to work with an auteur that would do something completely different than the styles they're established with, and maybe go back to the influences that really influence them and the kind of filmmakers who would probably bring about newer and greater animated films. You know, when I think of animated films that don't use dialogue, some of the ones that I think of are like The Illusionist particularly, and I think The Illusionist is able to do a lot of what this film is, but is able to be specific in a time period, and even Triplets of Belleville as well. And I don't think The Red Turtle does that, but I still think The Red Turtle is a really great movie and one of the better and more interesting animated films of the year that's really had a lot of great animation gems to it. The design feels very Hergé, and it kind of has that simple kind of European character design to it, but I also like how it uses kind of the more Ghibli style that obviously had a sense to its design. I like all the little sea creatures and creatures that live on this island, and I even love seeing like this big red turtle, the titular red turtle, I guess. And it shows, I think, that this director, if he's ever going to make another feature, I hope, with Studio Ghibli or not, I think it's a director I'm very interested in, and this kind of storytelling and animation I think will always be something I'm really interested in, because I think it shows how strong visual storytelling can be and how much you can do with just visual storytelling. And some of my favorite films usually do that, and I appreciate this film, but I don't think it really grabs me in the way that films like The Illusionist certainly did, or Triplets of Belleville, because it just doesn't have that specificity. It just kind of tells you the story. It almost feels more like an amazing animation exercise rather than a great animation story, although I think it does have a very good story. I just don't think it really connected to me. But I think for a film that I really respect and was really awed and struck by, to not necessarily connect with me as much as it could, but still be an amazing piece of work, really says a lot about this director and this movie. And I think regardless of this film maybe not being my favorite animated film, I think The Red Turtle is still a film that you really shouldn't miss out on. So if you have seen The Red Turtle and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.